Good morning
Welcome
and
to.
welcome. This is the first in our three-part GDPR webinar series, GDPR, How Does It Affect Me? Today we're going to cover the major themes in GDPR to give you a baseline on the information and to help you start organizing your data to prepare for compliance. In subsequent webinars, we'll talk about GDPR compliance in regards to marketing and CRM data. So let me first start by introducing myself and our other hosts today. My name is Deneen Panarelli. I'm the Marketing Manager at Technology Advisors, and my co-host is our CEO and owner, Sam Biardo. Many of you are probably familiar with TAI, but for those of you who aren't, we are a software consulting company out of Chicago with more than 30 years of experience, and we help businesses find, customize, and implement software. Our biggest realm is within CRM, but we help users with selection and adoption of all kinds of software, from marketing automation to productivity tools, AI, and predictive analytics. So before we get into this lovely presentation, I just want to take a minute to acclimate everyone on the platform that you're looking at. This is On24, which may be a webinar platform that you are possibly not familiar with, so just want to give you a quick tour. If you notice at the bottom of the screen, there's a couple of images down here. Those are what we call widgets. So starting from the right, the speaker bio, if you click that, that'll open up and show you the picture and contact information for Sam and I. Next to that are our resource list. You will see we have some resources in there for you. The first one is from the Information Commissioner's Office. That's their 12 steps to take now for preparing for GDPR, as well as a few other checklists and information that might be helpful to you. You're welcome to download that at any time. Next to that's your Q&A. If you click that, it should already be open on your screen on the left-hand side, but anytime you have a question throughout the presentation today, feel free to enter it into there, and we will get that answered for you. Then you have your media player, which is controlling the volume through your computer, and your slide deck. And all of these things can be adjusted. You can make it bigger or smaller on your screen if you like, reposition wherever you would like it to go. So with that said, I will turn the floor over to Sam to get us started.
Thank you, Deneen. We got a lot of slides and a lot of material to cover. So, and I tend to talk fast. So if I'm talking a little too fast, just shoot me a question or hit me up, and I'll make sure I slow it down a bit. Today we're going to talk about GDPR. I think GDPR is going to be one of the major events of the year that no one knows about. And we're going to just run through a few slides here. But first, we have to talk about the legal stuff, which is basically saying that the material in this webinar is my general comments and my understanding, and effectively I'm not a lawyer, and we recommend that for your sake you get legal help if you want more information about GDPR. And with that, I'm going to move on to the next slide here, which is our agenda slide. And so today we're going to talk about, first of all, what is GDPR and does it apply to me? And then what's the impact? How are they going to be penalized? And I know a lot of people feel like, so what? This is something to do with Europe. But it really does affect everyone in the world. And then finally, how do I prepare my business to handle GDPR? And then we'll talk a little bit about some GDPR products that are coming to market and what they will do for you. So with that, we're going to jump over to what is GDPR, and it was a law that was written about 2.5 years ago. It's the General Data Protection Regulation, and the idea is that it's a privacy law for the citizens and subjects of the European Union. So the law imposes an obligation on any business in any country that handles information, personal data information about EU citizens. This is a global law, so no matter where you are in the world, you are affected by it, and it's going to be adopted not only by EU but also by the UK. I think this is just the beginning of a trend to see other similar laws coming to market as well. And so with that, we'll go a little more deeper. What it does is it guarantees the rights of citizens of the EU and subjects of the EU, and we'll go into a little bit of what that means, for the following. They have the right to get access to the information that you have about them. So if you have any information about an EU citizen, they have a right to actually access that information. They have a right to be told that you have information about them. They have the right to change that information. They have the right to remove that information. And it's not simply, I don't email to them. It is they literally you need to show that you're removing the data. They have the right to restrict your use and when you use it. They have the right to prevent you from giving it to other people. They have the right to object that you actually have it and how you got to it. The right not to be a subject of an automated decision-making process, including profiling. So, for example, if you're taking river cruises and you're using that information about past river cruises to select new subjects, you can't use that information because now you're profiling them. And this is essentially what the law is covered in a general term. And I will also tell you that from reading it multiple times, it's a very vague law, and so I expect a lot of issues when it gets first deployed because a lot of these items are very vague in how they describe them. GDPR adds some concepts as well. So it adds to already established rules for processing information. Their goal is to define a lawful integrity, purpose of limitation, data deletion, and security to personal information. And it comes up with the concepts of accountability. So accountability is your ability to demonstrate compliance and to keep an accurate record of how you use the data and how you're maintaining compliance. And so let's sort of go into that. So if someone requests that their information be deleted, you need to have an audit trail or maintain an audit trail that shows that information has been deleted without actually having access to the information. This becomes exceptionally complex because at any point in time, if a citizen complains about your use of their data, the EU can in fact audit you, and you need to provide access to that audit trail. The second part is privacy by design. When you implement a new product or a new process, you must take into account GDPR compliance at the time you design that process. So if you're going to take it as simple as a marketing campaign, if you're going to have a marketing campaign, that marketing campaign must take in consideration GDPR compliance. Things like buying lists are now subject to GDPR compliance. So a lot of the techniques you would use today in say, a marketing approach needs to be reevaluated to ensure that they're compliant with GDPR. The second thing is privacy by default. So in the past, we might have a form on our website. We do this all the time here at Technology Advisors. We have a form, and you ask for more information. A lot of times we will have their, the opt-in pre-selected. You can no longer do that. If you have EU citizens' information today, you need to not only validate that they want to maintain on your list and maintain a record of that validation, but any future citizens must opt in. Now, if you have a business relationship with somebody, you can correspond with them for up to 2 years prior to them having to renew that business relationship. So if I'm going to buy something from you and I'm an EU citizen, you have the right to reach out to me for a 2-year period. But after that, you no longer have that right unless I expressly say so. Also, during that entire period, you have to give me the option to completely opt out or update or change any of that information, which a lot of people I know don't do today. The third one is called Data Protection Impact Assessment. And you must be able to identify and address any privacy risks from any new processing activities. So, and this goes back to the GDPR audit. If you're doing any type of new processes, the GDPR has the right to come in and audit you, and you have to prove that everyone you're talking to has effectively agreed, opted in, you give them access to their information, and that you're in compliance with all the GDPR rules. So, you know, the real question is, does this really apply to me, right? Well, it applies to any entity who processes or retains information on a subject of the European Union. So subjects, so they have these two concepts of citizens and subjects. Subjects is like the superset of citizens. A citizen who lives in the EU is a subject. A citizen who lives in the United States, but they're a EU citizen, is a subject. And if I happen to be living this month in the EU, I'm considered a subject. So where this gets really interesting is that, let's say you're an entity in the United States who's selling to people who are living in Florida. If those people living in Florida actually are European citizens living in Florida, you could potentially be at risk for violating GDPR. So this is where it gets sort of interesting, and I know we have someone talking about data cleaning towards the end of the last seminar, but you really need to understand, are these people EU citizens, and therefore you actually want to err on the side of asking everybody to opt in. And so this process here really is, this one rule about subjects makes it very, very tricky for you to understand, just because I don't have a European address doesn't mean I'm not an EU citizen, and therefore I can be in violation of GDPR. Who is impacted? Well, if you're doing business to business, you're impacted. If you're doing business to consumer, you're really impacted, because that's probably the biggest case going forward. But anybody, small businesses or enterprises, there are some opt-out rules, but it's like unless you're mailing to less than 500 people, which I don't know anyone who is mailing less than 500 people, this is essentially applying to you. So everybody, whether you're inside or outside the EU, is impacted as long as you're talking to more than 500 people when you do mass marketing or have programs. The other thing that comes up with GDPR is the concept of a data controller and a data processor. So think of a data processor as somebody, somebody who processes mailing lists for you or does mass mailings. Data controller is someone who manages a list. The concept of the data controller and the data processor deals with the chain of responsibility. So if I if I'm the person preparing the list and I pass the list on to somebody else who then passes the list on to somebody else, everyone in that chain is liable for violating GDPR if one person in the chain violates GDPR. And same thing is true for processors. If I'm producing a list on your behalf and I get it wrong or I violate GDPR, not only am I liable as the producer of the list, but so are you for giving me the list. So this is really a very all-encompassing process and does require a fair amount of effort in maintaining it. So what's the penalty? So for not adhering to GDPR, there's fines, and there's the way it reads is they have to get a fine. You have to be blatantly ignoring it or not putting processes in place to address this. So as long as you're actively working on putting processes in place, you get sort of a get out of jail free card for a while, but the fines are pretty intense. 10 million euros or 2% of your annual revenue for administrative and security breaches. For example, that's just failure to keep your auditing information. 20 million euros or 4% of your annual revenue if there's actually a breach. The fines, then there's additional fines by member states. So if this process happened in Germany, Germany can lay on yet another fine. The really interesting part about this is the way they structured it. You're saying to yourself, well, what do I care if they fine me? I'm not doing business with Europe. Well, the challenge is that part of the law says that if you're a bank and you wish to operate or do like credit card processing in the EU, that you become a collection agency for the EU in a GDPR violation, which means that they could actually go to your bank and freeze your assets because your bank happens to work in the EU. So this becomes a real big issue, something you can't just ignore. So who's prepared? Well, it turns out about 3% of the companies right now are prepared for GDPR, and this is probably one of the biggest issues. This is about a month old, but from Dell, and we're actively trying to help companies prepare for GDPR, and we think this is, even though the May deadline is coming quickly, we're suggesting that people immediately do a GDPR audit and immediately look at the information they're working with and start a process or plan to make that information in compliance. So how to prepare my business for GDPR compliance? Well, the first thing you have to do is do a data audit, which is what personal information does your company have and who have you shared it with? That's the first step. And so I'm sure that in itself is a pretty large project. I know we're doing a couple of these right now for companies to try to help them figure out where their CRM data is and what campaigns it was used and did it actually get out of your organization. The second part is the software that you're using in compliance. So for example, here's a great example. If I'm using a CRM, and let's say I'm using Infor CRM, and someone requests their information be removed, and you go through and you blank out that information, because Infor has an audit trail called Track Changes, technically you're not in compliance because you'll actually be able to see that someone erased that data, but the old data is still in the system. This is part of the problem. So you need to make sure that your CRM and your marketing automation solution is GDPR compliant. Now, Salesforce and Microsoft today are GDPR compliant. Sugar is their spring release, which will come out in April, will be GDPR compliant, and the next release of Infor CRM is also GDPR compliant, and I have a BPM Online, which is another product we work with, is already GDPR compliant. And if you have a question about whether you're GDPR compliant, we'll help you research that. But that's something that you need to make sure that the software itself is compliant. Then you need to understand if your business is considered a controller or a processor or both. In other words, if you do you need to hire what's called a data protection officer to ensure that your data is always staying in compliance? And then you have to put together a privacy by design plan. Now, what we're seeing a lot of folks do is they're building out customer portals that will notify their customers that they have personal information and allow them to remove that information. And there are now third-party companies, which we'll talk about a little later, that are coming into existence that will help you manage that portal information. So the next thing we have to do is we need to put in place a procedure guide that will allow us to detect, report, and investigate any breaches. So you need to have that in place prior to a breach, otherwise you're going to have some issues with compliance. So you need to develop a documented process on how you're going to handle breaches. And then you need to provide your employees an understanding of what the compliance rules are once you have them for your organization. And then finally, you have to figure out and make permissible the use of data for people who are in the EU. So what do I have to do? Well, I'd say prepare now. You can come up with creative ways of doing sales and marketing. We're investigating, we're putting an emphasis this year on inbound marketing versus outbound marketing. By that I mean we are not doing as much outbound mailing lists, and we're also going through a process of asking everyone to re-opt into every mailing list that we have so that we can show traceability of people from the EU has opted in. We are not buying lists anymore. I think the days of buying lists should be over because you can't control them and you could be liable if the list has EU citizens. We are getting rid of any pre-checked boxes on our website. We're letting people opt in, and in fact, if people don't opt into a list, we only retain that information for a very short period of time. I believe the rule is 6 months. So if someone does opt in, you can keep it for 6 months. You can't actually do anything with it, but you can keep it for 6 months. But after 6 months, you have to get rid of it. So we're building systems for customers that will help go through their information, categorize it as a lead that hasn't opted in, and building systems that will help remove it. We are offering consent cookies on websites, so you have to, if you go to our website now, it'll immediately ask you if it's okay to drop a cookie, so that's you stay in compliance with EU. And then we're making sure that any software or third-party systems we're working with are also compliant. So we're making sure products like On24 and we use Act-On, those products have all maintained their compliance with GDPR as well. And so There are some products and services that are you might want to take a look at. We just partnered with a company called GDPR Edge. What they provide, this is a business to consumer version of GDPR management tool, but what it does is it creates a portal for any person to log in and control their information. It also maintains a public and private key on that information, so that when you are audited, you can give a public key to the EU auditors, and that will let them audit you without actually giving them access to data. And it also controls and removes all data from the system, so it maintains all the compliance rules. Another thing we're seeing people do is we're seeing them implement a customer portal for their business-to-business relationships. So they will put up a customer portal. The customer portal will let customers know that they have the rights to modify and change their information, and it will track that modification and change of information. It will just show that information has been removed or deleted or changed without showing the previous value, but it also tracks things like who did it, when was it done, and so on. There's a GDPR data vault tool called Alien Vault that you can integrate with your CRM that will maintain the audit ruling for GDPR compliance. You can also develop auditing processes for your marketing automation and CRM data. We are doing that for some companies right now. There are companies out there like DQ Global that are helping you clean your data and identify that this particular information is from a EU citizen. And then for sugar customers, we are building out a new version of the customer spot that will support portal information that allow customers to modify and change and adhere to GDPR. And I think that is my last slide. Are there questions?
While we wait to see if anyone has follow-up questions, I just want to reiterate our next webinar is going to discuss GDPR compliance for marketing. So this is our baseline of information to help you get going. So the next webinar will be with the head of privacy and digital compliance at Acton Marketing Automation, and that's going to give us an in-depth overview of GDPR's effects specifically on marketing, ways you can prepare your website, your forms, other marketing materials for compliance. And you can find the registration link for that should have been in here, but I will send a follow-up email to this webinar, and in that follow-up email I have the registration link. Otherwise, you can also go to our website at www.techadv.com, and if you scroll down on that homepage, there's a calendar of events there, and you'll see GDPR webinar series, and you can register that way. So either way, I'll get you that. Okay, so we do have one question, Sam. It sounds like fines are going to be actually enforced. Any idea how quickly they'll be assessed and collected?
I think we really don't know, actually, because a lot of this stuff will probably go to courts in EU to make sure that they're being assessed properly. But I think what you're going to end up seeing is as long as, and in fact, from what we're hearing from our attorneys, is as long as you're building processes today, you will not get fines initially, because all they really want to do is guarantee that you're making an effort to get this stuff in place.
Okay, any other questions? Hopefully we answered a lot of your concerns and inquiries about GDPR. And as I mentioned, we're gonna keep diving in. We got one next month. We got another one the month after that. We're gonna get you fully prepared with all your data and all your marketing and sales efforts.
And again, if you have any questions about GDPR beyond this, feel free to reach out to your friends at Technology Advisors or your consultants that you're working with.
All right. Thank you so much, Sam, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I'll be sending that follow-up email. If you think of a question later, just reply to that email that you'll receive from me, and we can answer your question that way as well. Have a great afternoon, everybody.